My name is Max Banfield. Welcome to this talk about how I invented the world's first standing computer desk. Millions of them are now being manufactured and sold throughout the world, so I'd like the public to know the facts about its origin. In 1981, I had already completed the theory that sitting at a desk was a cause of health problems, and I was approaching various individuals in the media to ask them if they would interview me about this idea. And this is what an ABC radio supervisor said in his reply to me. "I'm sure that you will understand our caution over the putting of radical and controversial but less than generally accepted theories on illness and their cures to the listening public." This is a comment that was received after I invented the standing desk, and it was in the 8th edition of a book I published. That's the book. And the first illustration in the book is a man standing at a desk. And this is what was said by Laurie Eddy, who was the Vice President of the South Australian branch of the Australian Skeptics, when he reviewed that book in 1998. "It is almost totally rejected by modern medical authorities, and with virtually no modern research on this subject, other than my own." About 2 years later, I completed the 11th edition of that book, and that's the illustration, the world's first standing computer desk. And then the same review was published in the Skeptic magazine. A couple of years ago, in 2015, I found these comments. This was in the Mashable.com website. It is estimated that the US White House will be spending $700,000 for height-adjustable standing desktops and accessories. Also in 2015, I saw this comment. It's in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 26th of October 2015. It says, "The Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has included a standing desk in his office as an example of the high regard he has for the latest and best scientific innovation." I'll now proceed to provide you with a lot more evidence. This is a display that I put on at the Golden Groves Art Centre a year or so ago. To show the amount of research that I put into this. This is my main diagram at the moment about how the standing desk evolved. This is a photo of all the books that I've written on this subject, not counting hundreds of letters to newspapers and also essays in various magazines and journals. And you can see the illustration of a man standing at a desk. That's from the 11th edition. That's my #1 website, 190,000 hits. Established in 1994. That's my latest website. I have 2 at the moment. I started studying in 1975, and this is the essay I wrote in 1980. See if you can get it all. That is the second page of that essay. I called it the matter of framework for various reasons, but the framework of the body affects the framework of symptoms, etc. So that's the essay, published in the Australasian Nurses Journal in June 1980. That's an item put in the Nurses Journal expressing the concept that sitting up straight is important for your health. This was published in a magazine or a newspaper called Probe, and as you can see, the general concept that sitting up straight frees the pressure from your chest and abdomen, and when you lean forward, you're compressing the internal anatomy. That's published in 1980, November, December. I then started contacting the media to ask them if they'd interview me in relation to this particular idea. I contacted the TV stations, the radio stations, the newspapers. It was quite freely published in the Australasian Nurses Journal, but the newspapers, TV stations, and the radio stations were very reluctant to talk about it. It was published in the Australasian Nurses Journal, and you can see there it occurs in the Cumulative Index to Nursing Literature, Allied Health Literature, International Nursing Index, Author's Guide to Journals and Nursing, circulating throughout Australia, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand and every quarter of the globe. About 15 of my essays were published in that journal over a period of 5 or 6 years between 1978 and 1983, all relating to building up to this theory and a couple of extra items as well. Now this is a letter from the Institute for Fitness Research and Training, Tony Sedgwick. So I'll give you a bit of background information on that. One of the symptoms I had in 1975 was a quite abnormal response to physical exertion. And I found later that the South Australian Institute for Fitness Research and Training was inviting members of the public to attend exercise classes under medical supervision. I therefore decided to enrol. I went through some testing where I was encouraged to pedal a cycle faster and faster and faster, found it extremely difficult, and was later entered a class, about 40 or 50 people, down on an oval and in a hall where we did various exercises and jogging. I found it difficult to keep up with everyone else, caused a lot of problems, so I slowed down and trained twice a week for 3 months, and then 4 times a week for another 3 months, and then every day of the week for another 3 months. 3 times at the Institute's venues and 4 times around at local parks. And then I injured my knee and had to stop. A few years later I found a reference book which referred to the fact that the world's top researchers were having difficulty getting patients with this particular problem to train for 12 weeks. And I knew how to solve that problem. A year or so later I met a friend of mine who said he actually knew the head of the Fitness Institute where I trained. He said he was a nice guy and insisted that I go and see him. So I did. And I discussed the idea of training at a particular rate rather than going faster and faster. He's a friendly guy, he thought it was a great idea and it could solve a major medical problem. So I said, why don't you get your 2 researchers to investigate this? Well, they were both research cardiologists and they were too busy on other projects. For instance, exercise and asthma, exercise and heart disease, exercise and obesity, exercise and smoking. They didn't have time to do another program on exercise and fatigue. So to cut a long story short, he said, why don't you run the project? I said to him, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not qualified, I didn't know how come I could be authorised to do that. And if I did all the research, I didn't think a medical journal would publish my article because I'm not a doctor. And he said, well, we can overcome that by setting up a committee. And he'll arrange for the researchers to collect the data. I'll need to get a few doctors on the committee to back up the fact that this is a good idea. And then I can do the project and so forth. I didn't want to do it because I had a lot of other problems that I was trying to solve at the same time. But I came to the conclusion that if I didn't do it, this problem probably wouldn't be solved for another 500 years, so I better do it. And but I discussed with him the posture theory and the problems I was having getting people to agree with it, even talk about it. And I said, would you write a letter of endorsement for that theory? And he did, and that's that letter of endorsement. And then I said, well, okay, I'll get on with organising this other project. Now, here's some comments he made in that letter of endorsement. It's from 1982. Mr. Banfield's work on the interaction between body type, etc., and physical activity, the posture theory, and their relationship with health raises many interesting matters. First, it draws attention to a syndrome found in a considerable number of people who are unfortunate in two ways. They experience symptoms which they may be very disabling while suffering a condition which is poorly understood and for which there seems to be no standard effective treatment. So that's a summary of his comments. This is the other research project I was involved in at the time. You see my name there. You can see also the date. It was published in the news, 1982. And basically I was looking at ways of treating certain symptoms with exercise and ways of treating other symptoms with posture. This was published in On Dep, a student newspaper at Adelaide University, in 1995, and generally is agreeable with the idea. Wasn't particularly impressed with my writing style, but the idea was good. In 1993, I was diagnosed with cancer and given 2 months to live with no hope of cure. The cancer was in my blood, my bone marrow, showed up on x-rays, blood tests, and then a surgeon excised a small gland and it was examined and found to be cancerous. And this is the CAT scan report. And if you was to read it, you could see why the cancer specialist said to me, your body's riddled with cancer. He said, if you've got one small cancer on your neck, we may be able to remove it and cure it. If you have cancers in your chest, we may be able to give you a reasonable recovery possibility. But you've got cancer in your blood, your bone marrow, your neck, your chest, your abdomen. It's spread too far, and so he said, basically, tidy up your financial affairs, which means write your will. Now, I thought, well, I'm not going to live long enough to cure cancer, so I'll write a book about posture and health and see how long I last. If I die, well, these books will be sold to libraries all around Australia. If I live, well, maybe I'll profit from the ideas being used. So all my books were covered by copyright, all rights reserved. Now, as well as writing and asking various people to discuss this theory, I also sent letters to newspapers. Probably 100 were published and quite a few on posture. And here's just a couple published in the Messenger Leader, the local newspaper where I live, and one's entitled Matter of Posture, 10th of March 93, 26th of March 93, Postural Pressure. As I said, I was diagnosed with cancer in 1993. I was supposed to only live for 2 months, but I kept alive. And then in 1997, I got heart disease and was given only a short time to live because of that, and advised to have a bypass operation. I decided to read a book by Ross Horton about the Pritikin Diet, and I was impressed by the fact that he lived for 20 years after developing his diet and going on that diet. So I basically made a variation of his diet to suit my own health, and I survived in 6 months, and 9 years later I produced that audio CD. Right, now that's 1997, I had heart disease. 1998 I started having surgery for cancer and chemotherapy. There's a cancer scar, remove a cancer from my neck. It came back in 1999. I had more surgery, more chemo, and then a stem cell transplant. Well, in 1998, while I was going through that, I invented the world's first standing computer desk, which you can see a photo of it there. And you can see also my comments on copyright law there. And the reason I mentioned copyright law, copyright on all my books, copyright all rights reserved all the way through, because I knew I was making major discoveries. I recognised how important they were, very difficult to get other people to recognise they were important. And I thought that sooner or later people are going to recognise this and start using it. Now, also in 1998, as I said before, Laurie Eddy, the Vice President of the South Australian branch of the Australian Skeptics, did a review of that book. That's the first page of the review. I'll just go through them. That's the second page of the review. I'll go through it again. That's the third page of his review. It's a review of a book that was the 8th edition. Quite a few pages in that book. The final edition was 1,000 pages, but this one was a few less. So that's a review of the book. And this is a final page of that review. And this is the book he's talking about. And that's the first illustration. My conclusion was that standing at a desk had some advantages. And this is what he says. Such a theory is fraught with many difficulties. It's almost totally rejected by modern medical authorities. And there's virtually no modern research on this subject other than mine. And this is the same review in The Skeptic 2 years later, The Skeptic magazine. So at the time I developed that idea, it was still being ignored or rejected. This is the posture theory diagram, shows sitting at a desk, compresses the internal anatomy to cause various symptoms. This illustration here on the left is my diagram, copyrighted 1980, lasts for 7 years after I've died. And on the right, breathing.com, an American company, has put copyright 1997, made a couple of changes. But you can see that the shoes are the same, the trousers are the same, the general outline's the same. And it's obvious where the idea came from. Came from mine. Now, that's an e-book which I did in about 2012. The reason these books didn't have the illustration on the front is because of hardback book, very expensive to produce. With the computer books, it was relatively easy to put the main illustration on the cover. And that's available through Amazon.com. It doesn't sell very well, but that's where these ideas come from. Now that's 2012. This is 2014. Standing desk could save your life. The idea that I've survived cancer and heart disease for 20 years has obviously come to be known. This is the Washington Post, and that's 2014. And you can see the general theme. A person sitting at a desk with all the symptoms illustrated all around it, with some variations from my theme. When I saw all these people publishing information about standing desks, etc., and sitting being harmful to health, I went to the newspapers and TV stations and said, that's my idea, it's been around for decades. If you want to talk about these people developing the ideas, why don't you talk to me? But for some reason they don't. But the local newspaper, I wrote to them on several occasions and I said, in the 1980s and 90s, I sent letters to the Messenger about my theory on sitting at a desk being harmful to health, and you know that there's nothing new in these modern publications. So I wrote to them and I said standing is not new, and it published in 2014. Now this article here was in the Advertiser on the 2nd of June 2015, and it says, healthier, happier, more productive workers stand on their own 2 feet rather than sitting down all day. Research shows. They say that a panel of international experts have developed world first guidelines on how many hours to sit, how to stand and move about. Well, when I developed this concept of the standing desk, the immediate idea was that if you're sitting at a desk all day and it's causing problems, standing at a desk can probably cause a different set of problems. So the thing to do is vary it between sitting, standing and moving. So there's nothing new about that idea. And they talk about posture. Most people are talking about standing desks say sitting is harmful to health, but somewhere in the text there's usually comments on posture, because it's all about posture. Now, one of the young researchers there mentioned that standing at a desk instead of sitting might take a while to get used to, and it makes her more alert. Well, I made that observation in the late 1970s, published it, and also wrote theories about it at that time about why. And basically, if you lift the pressure off your chest and abdomen, blood will flow more freely from the feet to the brain. Of course, that's a rather complex concept, but I not only made that observation 40 years ago, I also wrote a theory about it. Now, you've seen all the people hard to convince 30 or 40 years ago, totally rejected 16 or 70 years ago. That's on the web now, and that's just one of many pages of people using the sort of diagrams based on my theory and my illustration. You can also go on the web and you'll find page after page of standing desks, and they're all derived from my original desk. Variations on the theme. Some people make them go up and down, some people put hinges on them, some people put a treadmill underneath them, and some people add a bit of design feature into it, like a circle around it. But it's all based on the desk that I invented. There are major campaigns being run around the world now to promote standing desks. Nobody's mentioning my name, but there's GetAmericaStanding.org. It's their illustrations. There's also GetCanadaStanding.org, Get Mexico Standing. It's taking off all around the world. This is an article that says famous people used standing desks before me. One of them, they say the genius Leonardo da Vinci used one. Well, if he's a genius for using a bench, I'm the 20th and 21st century genius for inventing the standing desk. He used quill pens, pencils and paintbrushes, I assume. He didn't have consideration of separate heights for keyboards, mice, the computer and the screen, etc., which are part of my design. So the fact that people use it before me, well, they didn't have computers then. Now, one of the people who was around when I was writing about this in the 1980s and 90s was Norman Swan, Australian health reporter, and he's now giving doctors advice to spend less time sitting and more time standing. And this is the May 2016 version. And this is another one of his pamphlets, and it's from July 2015. And he's basically advising doctors to spend less time sitting and more time standing, use standing desks, and to recommend these things to their patients. And it's in the waiting room of probably every medical clinic in Australia. And I happened to find one when I was visiting my own GP in the last couple of years. Now, this is 2015, and as I said at the start, Australia's Prime Minister is using it as an estimate of his high regard for the latest and best in modern scientific innovation. It's my idea, the latest and the best, 16 years later. And this is President Barack Obama of the United States, the White House, The executive office is spending up to $700,000 for height adjustable standing desktops and accessories. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because I invented it. Almost no one's mentioned my name and nobody's paying me royalties. So I'd like to tell you what people have said about my invention when I say it's my idea, and the manufacturers should be paying me license fees and royalties. It was published with copyright all rights reserved, as I showed you before, and I'm entitled to copyright till 70 years after I'm dead. And this is what they say. Too bad, sucker, that idea is now in the public domain. Lots of people have been trying to get it out there. The cat is out of the bag and you can't put it back. You're nothing special, they say. Lots of people have their ideas stolen these days, so forget about the past and get on with the future. They say there are tens of thousands of scientists nowadays and lots of people think of the same thing at the same time, so you can't claim world first. It's nothing new. Leonardo da Vinci, the genius, used standing desks. He didn't use computers, keyboards, mice, didn't need different heights for them. He just used paintbrushes and so forth. This is what they say. Copyright only applies to words, not ideas. So anyone can steal it by rewriting exactly the same idea or design principles with different words, or by making the same item with different nuts, bolts or hinges. Another comment, if you have any more good ideas about important health issues, you should give them away for free for the common good. Those comments do not represent the purpose of copyright law, which is to protect the rights of the individual, make sure he gets the majority of the profit, not the people who come later. They do not represent fair use of copyright. I did all the research, these people come along later, and they're getting all the money. And it does not encourage creativity or innovation. I still come up with ideas. I'm not particularly keen on publishing them, while other people are out there making all the money. Now, I'd like to talk about the healthcare economy because I think some people have some misconceptions about it. This is my invention of the world's first standing computer desk. As far as income is concerned, I've received nothing. The books I sold to libraries, school libraries in the 1990s, I've barely covered the cost. They're expensive to make. I sold many to Australian public and school libraries in all states. I gave one away to Adelaide University Library. I sold one to UniSA Library at North Terrace, and I sold them to TAFE colleges at Salisbury and Port Adelaide, and in many other places. They've been widely distributed. They're in the State Library, and by law I have to give a free copy to the State Library in Adelaide, and to the Parliamentary Library, and to the National Library Australia in Canberra. Many libraries bought several editions of this book, and some bought multiple copies because I've got branched. So I invented the world's standing computer desk, but I haven't made any money out of it. They're now being sold, manufactured and sold at the rate of billions of dollars a month around the world. The middlemen get the money. They are the peer reviewers, the researchers which are funded by research grants, employed by universities. The manufacturers, the salesmen make the money. Doctors, physiotherapists and other healthcare professionals charge fees for giving information like that. Governments save money on healthcare costs. Health insurance companies save money at the end of the year. The healthcare costs have reduced. Those billions of dollars go to shareholders who don't contribute to the research. The university, for example, charge between $20,000 and $100,000 per student to teach some things. And my ideas are now being taught at universities. The lecturers charge $150 an hour to teach. And sometimes the whole hour is discussing my ideas, and I have several of them. This is just one. The graduates then go out into the community and use my ideas as a treatment method, and they charge fees for that. Occupational health and safety companies are now going into businesses and recommending use of standing desks, and they're making millions of dollars. They're on the stock market, and smaller companies are changing to larger companies, and they educate small to large businesses about these things, and no doubt get commission on the standing desks that are installed. Businesses have reduced healthcare costs. Now then, there's the users of the standing desks. They're healthier, happier, more productive. So those are the beneficiaries. Now, what happens if I didn't publish that idea about the standing desk? It was totally rejected. Nobody wanted to talk about when I was inventing it. It wouldn't exist. There'd be zero money made. There'd be no middlemen. There'd be no cures for anything, no ways of preventing disease, no way of making desk workers healthy, happy and more productive. Without the ideas and discoveries of methods, there's nothing new to manufacture, there's nothing new to teach, there's no new treatment methods, there's nothing new to reduce healthcare costs. As a patient, it is to your advantage to encourage, support and protect the rights of those who provide solutions to health problems. Doesn't matter what your health problem is. Now, I hope you can do something to make sure that I get my rights. And thank you for listening to this.